I stood in the kitchen, moving quietly as the front door clicked shut, leaving the house eerily empty. My parents had gone to visit some relatives, and my stepbrother, Ethan, chose to stay behind, claiming he had a mountain of assignments to complete. Although it wasn't unusual for us to be alone together, there was an unsettling atmosphere about that day. A stillness enveloped the space, amplifying even the softest sounds. As I chopped vegetables for lunch, I tried to shake off a strange feeling growing in my chest. Ethan had been acting distant lately, more so than usual. We had never been particularly close, but since our parents married a few years ago, there had always been an underlying tension between us. I heard him coming down the stairs, his footsteps deliberate, as if he were lost in thought. He stopped in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an intensity that made me uneasy. "Hey, Emma," he said casually, but there was something deeper in his tone. "What are you making?" "Just some pasta," I replied, attempting to keep my voice light. "Want some?" he asked, but instead of retreating upstairs as he usually would, he lingered, his gaze fixated on me in a way that felt strange. A slight shiver ran down my spine as I continued my tasks, acutely aware of his scrutiny. "Is everything okay?" I finally ventured, turning to meet his eyes. He wore that same expression I had noticed recently, a smirk that didn't quite match the seriousness lurking behind it. "You seem on edge," he observed, the smile still lingering. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing myself to focus on the vegetables in front of me. Then, to my surprise, he stepped closer to the counter, standing uncomfortably near me. The scent of his cologne filled the small kitchen, clean and sharp, and I felt flustered. "It's just the two of us here today," Ethan said, his voice low. He paused, a weight hanging in the air. I focused on the stove, feeling my pulse quicken as a strange warmth washed over me. The tension was palpable. I turned off the burner and began plating the food, but my hands trembled. I was uncertain about where this interaction was headed, hesitant yet strangely curious. Ethan reached out to brush my arm, just a gentle touch, yet it sent an electric thrill coursing through me. I tensed up at the unexpected jolt. "What's gotten into you?" I asked, half laughing to break the thick atmosphere. But rather than stepping back, he leaned in closer. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, and the weight of his words settled heavily between us. Suddenly, I grasped the implications of what he meant. "Ethan, don't," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. His gaze darkened, and for a split second, I couldn't tell what he intended to do next. "I'm just saying," he began, a sly smile playing on his lips. "It's just the two of us here. What's wrong with talking?" But the look in his eyes told me he meant more than just conversation. Feeling the urge to create some distance, I stepped back. The kitchen, usually my favorite room, suddenly felt too small and confining with Ethan so close. "Just the two of us here." "What's wrong with talking?" he repeated, but his eyes betrayed a deeper intention. I took another step back, the playful tone of his voice clashing with the intensity in the room. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Trying to regain control, I forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Ethan?" I asked, aware of the tension building between us. He moved closer, and I felt my heart race in response. The air was charged with something unspoken. "Come on, Emma," he said softly, yet firmly. "You know what I mean." I turned away, picking up the plates I had set out earlier. Something about his gaze felt off, yet he remained silent as he edged closer, heightening my unease. I needed to escape the kitchen, a sanctuary now turned suffocating. "I'll take these to the living room," I said, attempting to sound casual. I didn't look back as I walked out, but I could sense him trailing behind, a shadow looming. Once in the living room, I placed the plates on the coffee table and settled at the far end of the couch, trying to create space between us. The TV was on, but I was too distracted by the weight of his stare to really pay attention. We sat in silence, the only sound being the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second felt like an eternity, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what things would be like if we weren't related?" he asked, his voice low, as if testing the waters. I felt a strange churn in my stomach. This was a line we had never crossed, and neither of us knew how to navigate it. I took my time with my response, unsure of what to say. "That's a strange question," I replied, attempting to deflect while absent-mindedly picking at my plate, feeling the loss of my appetite. "Technically, we're not really related. You're my stepsister, not my sister by blood," Ethan pressed, leaning forward slightly, as if that somehow justified his words. His gaze was intense, catching me off guard. It was clear he wasn't joking, he was serious, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. "Ethan, we can't," I started, but he interrupted me. "Why not?" he asked, his voice softening to a pleading tone. "Who would even know? We're just talking." The way he stressed talking made it sound like there was something more behind it. I shook my head, trying to steadfastly hold on to my reasoning. "It doesn't matter. We're family now, whether you like it or not." I gestured between us, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "This can't happen." He fell silent for a moment. I could sense the frustration simmering beneath his calm facade. "Emma," he finally said, leaning in closer. The uncharted territory we stood on felt precarious, and for a moment, I struggled to find the words. "We're family now, whether you like it or not," I said firmly, gesturing between us. "This can't happen." He fell silent for a moment, but I could feel the frustration simmering beneath his calm facade. "Emma, I've noticed the way you look at me. Don't pretend you've never thought about it." His words froze me. They struck harder than I expected, revealing a sliver of truth that I had tried to deny. There were fleeting moments, thoughts I had consistently pushed away, never allowing myself to confront. But now, as I sat here with him, it felt as though all those suppressed feelings were laid bare for both of us to see. "Stop," I whispered, unsure if I was addressing him or warning myself. He didn't stop. Instead, he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered a moment too long, sending a shiver down my spine, one I resented, along with the fact that I didn't pull away immediately. "Ethan, please," I murmured, my voice trembling. "This isn't right." He withdrew his hand but kept his gaze locked onto mine for a moment, the air thick with tension. "You're right," he said after a pause, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I don't know what got into me." We sat in uneasy silence, each heartbeat echoing in the charged atmosphere. Part of me was relieved he'd pulled back, but another part, one I didn't want to acknowledge, felt disappointed. I had to force myself to focus on the TV as my thoughts raced back to his words and his touch, along with my body's unwelcome response. "Ugh, I really hate this feeling of curiosity," I muttered to myself. "We should probably just forget this ever happened." Ethan's reaction was immediate. He looked at me as though grappling with my words. "Yeah, maybe you're right," he replied, though I sensed an undercurrent of reluctance in his voice. It was clear we both understood that this moment would not be easily forgotten. The silence between us deepened, each second adding weight to the air. I tried to shake off my unease, but it clung to me like a shroud. I stood up abruptly, seeking refuge from the intensity of his gaze. "I'll clean up the kitchen," I declared, needing distance from this charged moment. I caught a faint response from Ethan, but my heart was pounding too loudly for me to process it. In the kitchen, I tried to distract myself with the monotonous task of washing dishes, but the intensity of the encounter lingered, refusing to let me escape its grasp. I caught the faintest response from Ethan, but I didn't stick around long enough to hear it clearly. My heart was pounding, and the walls of the house felt like they were closing in around me. In the kitchen, I tried to distract myself by washing dishes, letting the warm water run over my hands. Yet, my thoughts kept drifting back to the couch, to Ethan, and the look in his eyes. How were we supposed to move past this? How could we go back to normal when nothing felt normal anymore? As I scrubbed a plate that was already spotless, I heard soft footsteps approaching. My pulse quickened even before he spoke. "Emma," he said tentatively from the doorway. "I think we should talk about this." I shook my head without turning around. "I don't think that's a good idea." I heard him sigh, a sound filled with frustration. "We can't just ignore this. We can't pretend it didn't happen." "That's exactly what we're going to do," I replied firmly, keeping my back to him. "We have to let this go." Finally, I turned to face him, locking my gaze onto his. I could see the conflict in his eyes. This was not something he'd let go of easily. "Why are you so afraid to admit there's something real between us?" he asked, stepping closer, his voice thick with emotion. "Because it's wrong," I shot back, sharper than I intended. Tears threatened to spill as I struggled to hold myself together. He stepped closer, a troubled look etched on his face. "Why can't you see it? Ethan, we're family, or we're supposed to be." He let out a frustrated scoff, shaking his head. "We're not really family, Emma. You know that. We didn't grow up together, we barely knew each other until a few years ago. That doesn't change things." I trembled. "But we live together. Our parents. We're supposed to be siblings, but we aren't." "Not really." We locked eyes, the tension palpable between us, pressing against my skin. This wasn't just about us, it was about the risks, the upheaval that could follow if we dared to venture down this path. "I get it," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you." His words hung in the air, a heavy weight on my chest. This was exactly what I had been dreading. Admitting there was something between us was like opening a door that couldn't be closed. "We can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "It'll ruin everything." Ethan took a deep breath, and I saw the disappointment shadowing his eyes. "I don't want to ruin anything. I just..." The sadness in his gaze struck me, an ache that surprised me for how much it hurt. "I didn't expect to feel this way," he admitted, struggling to push down the emotions that threatened to overwhelm both of us. "I don't want to hurt him, but this has to stop. We need to put an end to this. Whatever this is, whatever you think it might be, it's not real. We're just confused." The tightness in my throat threatened to overwhelm me, a mix of emotions swirling inside. We had been under the same roof for so long that it had clouded our judgment. I believed that once we got some space, everything would return to normal. He looked down, a deep frown creasing his face, and in that moment, I saw the quiet storm of emotions battling within him. Finally, he nodded, his reluctance evident. "I'll back off. I don't want to make you uncomfortable." Relief and regret washed over me. "Thank you," I replied quietly, my voice barely steady. I managed a small, tentative smile that felt hollow. As he turned to leave, he hesitated at the doorway, glancing back. "Emma, I'm sorry if this is confusing. I thought maybe it was okay, but I'm not sure. Let's just move on, okay?" His eyes searched mine one last time before he walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my thoughts. I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of unspoken words. For what it's worth, I never meant to make things complicated. I just don't know. The truth hung heavy in the air, we both understood it wasn't over. In the days that followed, a fragile silence settled between us. We avoided mentioning that night, yet the tension lingered like a storm on the horizon, an unwelcome presence we couldn't ignore. I sensed he was nervous too, but the silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. One night, while alone in my room, I heard a familiar knock on the door. My heart raced, it had to be Ethan. Even though our relationship felt tenuous, we were still connected. "Can we talk?" Ethan's voice was calm yet tinged with worry. I hesitated but eventually opened the door just enough to see him. His gaze met mine, searching for reassurance. "I just want things to be okay between us," he whispered. The weight of unfulfilled conversation hung heavy. I drew in a breath. "Yeah, me too." We stood in silence, neither able to articulate the turmoil swirling between us. Then, as if we shared an unspoken agreement, he nodded and turned to leave, shoulders slumped. In his departure, an odd sense of finality settled over me. Whatever strange connection had existed between us had reached its conclusion. Though the tension lingered, there was a mutual understanding. We both chose to move forward, carrying that silent weight inside. In that stillness, I realized that sometimes, the things we leave unsaid are far louder than the words we speak.